Hey, Saretsky here. Welcome back to the show. Want to put a video together on the updates from the Bank of Canada, as well as an update on the Richmond First Nations land dispute. We got some big updates in that as well. So first and foremost, the Bank of Canada, everybody watching that, every home seller watching, hoping, waiting for the Bank of Canada to keep cutting rates to try to stimulate the housing market. We're going to get into that in just a sec. But as expected, 25 basis point cut from the BOC. Their words were basically they feel rates are at about the right levels. And so they're actually at the bottom end of the neutral range, is effectively the area where they feel rates aren't stimulating, but they're not hindering economic growth either. So at the bottom end of that neutral range, the betting markets, the OIS betting markets, which is effectively an instrument that allows financial markets to bet on the direction of interest rates. There's currently no more rate cuts priced in for this year, 2025, and there are no rate cuts priced in for 2026. So again, if you believe markets, this was the final rate cut from the Bank of Canada over the next 12 months. Now, again, I think that will change. That can change. It probably will change as things evolve in the economy and in financial markets. I think we all know that Canada's tiptoeing into a recession. Things could get worse, and that could ultimately prompt OIS markets to change and the Bank of Canada to potentially cut further. Or again, you could have the flip side. Maybe inflation ignites and the Bank of Canada actually has to tighten rates from here. Again, but if you're a mortgage holder wondering what to do, what this effectively means is variable rate mortgages came down 25 basis points this week. Most variable rate mortgages today, if you go into most of the big five banks, you're going to be looking at about 3.75 on a variable rate mortgage, 3.75. That's the lowest of the rate options available on the marketplace today. Keep in mind, as we talked about, your fixed rate mortgages are priced on the bond market. Okay. They are priced on the bond market. Bond yields actually up slightly this week. So, you've got your variable, I'd call it 3.75. You've got your 3-year fixed at about 3.9-ish. You got your 5-year fixed at about 4.10, 4.15. So there's really not a huge difference between sort of those three most popular mortgage products. Again, obviously, if you're a little bit more risk tolerant, you got a stomach for it, you can ride the variable at 3.75, or if you want that comfort and that peace of mind, again, the bond market is what is pricing fixed rate mortgages. And there's arguably a case to be made that fixed rates might not come down further. They could potentially go up given the whopper of a federal budget that we're expected next week, which is expected to have a huge, potentially we're hearing $100 billion deficit that could ultimately upset the bond market and push yields higher. So again, keep that in mind moving forward. But there's a couple interesting notes from the BOC where, again, I'm just a natural skeptic. They talked about an uptick in residential investment. I'm going, an uptick in residential investment that could sort of buoy the economy. And I'm going, I don't see it. I'm not seeing it in the sales numbers. I'm not seeing it in any of this sentiment. You look at, we have this article out just this week, the same week the BOC comes out from Build, which is a builders association, GTA, saying, quote, "It's worse than the 1990s. There were just 28 new condos sold in the entire city of Toronto for the month of September, about 90% below the long-term 10-year average. There is effectively no new home sales in Canada's largest major metro. And you can go back and look at data. A good friend of the show, Mike Moffat, put out some data just this week showing the huge drop on a year-over-year basis in new home sales as per CMHC data. You have Vancouver down 60% year-over-year, GTA down 60%, Calgary, apartments down close to 60%, Montreal down 30%. So it is just a bloodbath wherever you go in the new home space, which again, this data, you're like, they're seeing an uptick in residential investment. It's almost like the uptick that we saw in the CPI inflation data last week that said rents were accelerating at a pace of 6% per annum over the last 3 months. And again, you show me a rental market in Canada that is seeing accelerating rents to the upside, and I am not seeing it anywhere. I'm not seeing it in the data per rentals.ca. I'm not seeing our conversations with property managers. there is nothing to suggest that rents are accelerating, pushing inflation higher, but yet the data from the government is seeming to suggest that. So again, I think this is where critical thinking is warranted, and I don't see any uptick in residential investment, not today, and probably not for the next little while in that space. In fact, again, it is incredibly dire when you have developer communities telling you it is worse than the 1990s downturn. And it is, because if you look at the numbers bearing out, it is absolutely worse than the 1990s. Speaking of which, pivoting gears into, we talked about it last week, the city of Richmond, the First Nations land dispute. Now, remember, there was a letter that was getting sent out by Mayor Malcolm Brody, basically saying, hey guys, listen, your title might be impacted by this court ruling. You know, your thought of home ownership, your fee simple title might be in jeopardy. We're going to have this town hall meeting. Well, they actually had to move the venue because there's so many people showing up. That was a packed room in the city of Richmond, and tensions were extremely high. All the media was there. And I want to clip to an interview at that meeting right here.
And now, talk to your local MLA is what we're getting.
Same demands you carried earlier than the 2025.
Yep.
What attribute is not telling you to? We're not having a story for you like you asked. We have a story for you.
He doesn't have any answers. He knew what's going on. He sat there and enjoyed his $400,000 a year he makes.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. I'm bitter, yes. My tax dollars are at work right now. And who knows? I thought at least we're going to get a gift card out of this deal. Got nothing here tonight.
Are you going to continue to fight?
Oh, definitely. I'll be filing suit and stuff, right? I'll find out what my avenue is to go forward to protect my land. I've owned my land for more than enough years to know it's mine. I'm not giving it up without a fight.
What do you say to people who say this is about reconciliation? What does that mean to you?
No comment on that. I don't want to get started on that.
So this is just about land rights, your fee simple rate.
It's what I paid for. That's what it's all about for me. I want to keep what I paid for. Or someone can buy me out.
Have you looked into what this means for reselling or getting a loan or anything like that, or is it all too soon?
I haven't looked at anything like that yet.
How long have you lived here?
1975. I grew up in Richmond. I elected that guy.
Do you have a mortgage on your property here in Richmond?
I do.
Have you spoken to your lender?
I have.
And what have they told you?
They are not renewing it.
Wow.
Do you worry about your home price? Oh, do you worry about your home price fluctuating based on the situation?
No.
Can you take us back to when you first found out? I'm assuming it was a letter or online.
It was a letter that came in the mailbox.
What was going through your head?
Just mixed emotions. I've been paying for the city for no reason at all. I paid taxes, I bought the place. Now, lo and behold, I don't own my place. Not fair.
What did you make of what the lawyer said about Canada and the BC government not allowing government lawyers to argue extinguishment of Aboriginal title?
I think that's just a bunch of words. It meant nothing inside at all. Everyone had their own defense and stuff. If they were so adamant they could have allowed the homeowners to know, we would have spoken up back then, not 2025.
So you think that the lawyers had a duty to care for the citizens of Richmond as much as they had a duty to care for the actual court processes they were all respecting at the time?
I believe they had a duty to let every person that was involved with it know about it.
So why do you think they didn't tell you earlier?
Politics? That's all I can go about this politics.
So this is what I'm talking about, where people are really missing the big picture. They're saying, well, Steve, you know, like, the judge said this, and the two titles can coexist, and there's going to have to be a First Nations treaty, and it's all going to get figured out and worked out, and nobody's saying, you know, nobody's stealing that person's land or that condo or kicking them out of their home. This is all getting overblown. And the point I've been making is that these lands are no longer financeable. In the real world, in the banking world, there's no such thing as two titles coexisting. You walk into the branch tomorrow, you go to TD, go to RBC, you walk in, you tell them, I've got an accepted offer on this property. And by the way, I share the title. I share my fee simple title with the First Nations and you let me know what they say, I can guarantee you they will not lend you a mortgage on that land. You cannot have in the real world, banks won't lend on collateral that is in dispute. And they're saying, well, there's technically two titles here, fee simple and First Nations title are coexisting. That doesn't exist in the real world. And so what you're left with a scenario today, and this is my conversations internally with people high up at these banks. These properties today are not financeable. If you have an existing mortgage with them currently, it's likely and highly likely and most probable that you will just get a renewal. Your current and your mortgage, they will renew you. They don't want the public backlash or the negative perception around their brand and their reputation to then pull your mortgage away from you. But if you want to go and refinance, for example, if you want to sell and a new buyer wants to get a new mortgage on those lands, you will not get a mortgage, full stop. These properties are not financeable. If they're not financeable, if you want to sell and a new buyer can't get a mortgage on these properties because the title is in dispute, they are not liquid. They are effectively not sellable. And so people will say, well, they'll figure it out. Yeah, they probably will figure it out. The BC government is probably likely going to have to strike some sort of treaty agreement, some negotiation. They have to pay off this First Nations ban. They're going to have to fight it in court. They're eventually going to have to come to some sort of agreement to get absolute clarity on who owns the land and if the title is going to be First Nations title or if it's going to be fee simple title. But that is going to take time. It's probably going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years, probably somewhere between the range of 2 to 4 years to figure this out. So if you're a homeowner in these disputed lands, you're now stuck waiting 2, 3, 4 years, maybe more, until we get absolute clarity on the structure and who actually owns these properties. So again, you have liquid assets, which is going to be devastating for families that, are wanting to upsize and want to move on with life. They have a job relocation. There's an estate sale and, you want to sell the asset and move on and disperse, those assets into something else. These properties are not liquid until the title is rectified, and it's going to take time to go through government negotiations and through the court system. And that is the issue that I'm raising ultimately, because close to 90% of the land in BC is unceded territory, which effectively means that this is going to set the precedent for other bands and other First Nations bands to come out and say, hey, hold on a minute. We fished here 250 years ago. We are now going to stake our claim, similar to how the Cowichan Nations did. And that will then create a new pocket of land that becomes in dispute and another pocket of land that becomes in dispute. So all of a sudden, we have all of these lands popping up across BC, Ottawa, Quebec, that are in dispute. And the titles effectively can, as we've learned, they can coexist, which might work for a judge's perspective, but it does not work from a lender's perspective. And so all of a sudden, you can have all of this land in parts of the country, particularly in BC, where there hasn't been really very little treaty agreements. You have all of this land that effectively is not financeable, not liquid, and everybody's confused as to the ownership structure, which makes these properties uninvestable. So how do you invest in businesses and land to start companies, to start a family, build a house? And so this is the real problem. It's not so much that people say, well, we didn't enter into agreements with First Nations. Nobody's arguing that. People are just saying, listen, this cannot work in the real world. This cannot work at a time when you have a country that is trying to dig itself out of, I would argue, a recession. BC is running massive record deficits. They are desperate for investment into the province and into the country to pull ourselves up. We talk about the trade war, and you have all of this now hanging over your head that is going to potentially jeopardize hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars worth of investment in these disputed land claims. So that is ultimately what I'm watching on. I think this is ultimately going to create even more rift with First Nations bands. You're seeing it actually already in Richmond and now in Port Coquitlam, where you have disputed lands And the mayors have come out publicly and said, we don't do land acknowledgements anymore because we're actually in land disputes with these bands, which I would argue is ultimately fraying the relationships with these First Nations with all this. And I wouldn't be surprised to start to see more and more disdain or anger towards these land acknowledgements. You know, you hear them at the Canucks game before they drop the puck. Don't be surprised if all of a sudden, instead of cheers, you start to hear boos as people's land starts getting disputed and is illiquid. And I think this is a really, real big problem, not just from a real estate perspective, but from a social perspective. Again, I understand it is a touchy subject, but it is real. And that's why I think you're starting to see when you start to have disputes between fee simple title and someone's land where they paid, you know, they thought they owned it, paid property taxes on it, and is now suddenly in dispute with government. Ultimately, what's going to end up being government backdoor negotiations through various policy changes that are coming. I think the pitchforks are here. I think they're coming out. I think they're going to get worse. And so we'll watch. We'll see. And as always, hope that helped. We'll see you next week.